Hi again. F.F. Bruce, The Real Jesus. Jesus in Jerusalem. This is about the last journey to Jerusalem. Jesus was well aware of the risks he ran in coming to Jerusalem and engaging in public activity there. On one occasion in Galilee, when something said or done by himself or his disciples had annoyed Herod Antipas, he was warned by some friendly Pharisees to take evasive action, or Herod would kill him. Jesus did not take their warning over seriously. He would complete the work he had to do in Galilee, regardless of Herod's threats. It would never do for a prophet to be killed anywhere but in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the city that killed prophets. Now he was in Jerusalem, and he knew what that might mean for him. Indeed, when they were on the way to Jerusalem for the last time, he warned his disciples that the suffering of the Son of Man, of which he had told them while they were still in the north, was about to be realized. But they found such language increasingly incredible. In their minds, Jerusalem was not the place where prophets were killed. It was the place where kings were crowned. They knew the identity of the true king of Israel. Surely, when he reached Jerusalem, he would disclose his identity openly and receive the welcome that was his due. And when he was greeted as Israel's true king, they themselves, as his loyal followers, would receive appropriate recognition. Some days before the Passover of AD 30, Jesus and his followers came up the Jericho road to Jerusalem to be present in the city for the annual celebration. Passover commemorated the deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt in Moses' day. Jews all over the known world celebrated it, but only in Jerusalem were the Passover lambs killed and eaten, calling to mind the lambs which were killed and eaten in Egypt on the first Passover Eve. The killing of the Passover lambs ranked as a sacrifice, and the only place in the world where sacrifices could be offered, according to the current Jewish law, was the temple in Jerusalem. The road was thronged with pilgrim crowds, and as they approached Bethany, on the other side of the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, great excitement was unleashed, for people were still talking about a mighty work recently performed there by Jesus when he had called back one Lazarus to life after he had lain in a rock tomb for 3 or 4 days. Near Bethany, a donkey was provided for Jesus to ride on, and as he completed the journey to Jerusalem, the pilgrims hailed him as the one who would restore the kingship of David and his line. Some of them at least recognized in Jesus' action the fulfillment of a late prophetic oracle in which Jerusalem was called upon to rejoice at the advent of her king, who came to her humble and riding on an ass. That's Zechariah 9:9. But few of them understood the message that Jesus wished to convey. He was presenting himself to the people of Jerusalem as the agent of God, inviting them to choose the way of peace rather than the way of armed resistance. Had he come mounted on a war horse, that would have symbolized a call to military action. But in that case, the Roman garrison would have intervened quickly and decisively. As it was, what threat was offered by an unarmed man riding on a donkey, surrounded by a crowd of peasants yelling their heads off? The temple authorities, however, took the matter more seriously. Here was a crowd, they saw, convinced that the day of liberation was at hand, and if their excitement increased beyond control, as could easily happen, they might do something desperate, which would bring down the heavy hand of Rome. Jesus' intentions might be entirely peaceful, but they feared that he would be pushed into becoming at least the titular leader of an insurrection. If Roman reprisals fell on him alone, that would be no bad thing, but the danger was that many others, perhaps the city and temple as a whole, might feel the weight of such reprisals. If Jesus could be isolated, put out of harm's way, that would be best for all concerned. But the chances of taking action against him without stirring up a riot seemed to be slender while the festival was on. Now he has the cleansing of the temple. Their apprehensions were intensified by his cleansing of the temple a day or two later. In the outer court, he protested against the commercial activity that went on there because it was bound to interfere with the proper use of the sacred area. The outer court of the temple was also known as the court of the Gentiles because it was open to Gentile visitors who were forbidden on pain of death to penetrate into the inner courts. God-fearing Gentiles who wished to worship the God of Abraham in his temple had to do so in the outer court. Their presence there helped to fulfill the divine promise through a Hebrew prophet, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." That's Isaiah 56:7. But if the outer court was cluttered up with market stalls and the like, there was the less room for Gentiles to worship God. Hence Jesus voiced his protest. Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers. Moreover, like some of the prophets of old who acted their oracles in addition to uttering them, he backed up his oral protest by driving out the merchants and the animals they sold. That is, animals to be used by the worshippers for sacrificial purposes, presumably, and upsetting the tables where money might be exchanged. There was nothing wrong in itself with such traffic, but his Father's house, he said, was not to be made a bazaar. As the evangelists report the incident, one is reminded of the last sentence in the Old Testament book of Zechariah. Speaking of the day of the Lord, it says, there shall be no longer a traitor in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day. Zechariah 14, verse 21. This action was in no way directed against the Roman power. The Romans left the administration of the temple in the hands of the Jewish authorities and did not interfere in it. If the action had involved civil disturbance, especially if, as had been suggested, it marked an attempt by Jesus and his followers to take over the temple, the Romans would have intervened at once. Even the temple police, a body of Levites trained to keep order in the sacred precincts, do not appear to have been involved. The protest was a single-handed piece of symbolism on Jesus' part, and the temple authorities seem to have recognized this, for instead of arresting him, they asked him by what authority he did it. His reply was more or less to the effect that if they could not recognize genuine prophetic authority when they met it, no amount of evidence or argument would help. So they left it at that. Next time, tribute to Caesar. I put in a link this time, though, to By What Authority, a tract that you can find on onewonders.org PDF archive. How did Jesus demonstrate his divine authority? And does Watchtower leadership submit to the same test Jesus did? See you next time.